Says the former French foreign minister Roland Dumas said on French television that he was in London talking to British government officials before the trouble started in Syria with the so-called Arab Spring People's Revolution. And these British officials told him, before anything had happened, that they were going to start something in Syria with rebels against Assad. And this is what has happened in relation to America, or this is what's behind it, as they have picked off these countries on this project, the New American Century list. Here is a document headed U.S. Special Forces Unconventional Warfare Strategy, November 30th, 2010. And this is the American military process, technique for regime changing these countries on that list. This is what it said. Remember, November 2010. The US military's unconventional warfare strategy requires that target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed insurrection using, quote, propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government. That's what happened with all these countries that they have been involved in with this Arab Spring. This, they say, will create local and national agitation, helping organize, quote, boycott strikes and other efforts to suggest public discontent before beginning the infiltration of foreign organizers and advisors and foreign propaganda, material, money, weapons and equipment. Exactly what happened in Libya, exactly what happened in Syria. And it goes on, if retaliation by the target government, in other words, if the government defends itself from your so-called freedom fighter people's revolution, which you've orchestrated and funded and armed, if there's retaliation from the government to that, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of, quote, the people. This is why nothing was said when these Western armed, funded and trained rebels and mercenaries started attacking the regime of Gaddafi. It was only when Gaddafi responded, it was only when Assad responded that suddenly he's killing his own people, and the whole psychological game was played out exactly as they said. When? November 2010. 1 month later, after this was published, and of course it would have been in the background organized long before, we had the start of the Arab Spring with the events in Tunisia. And George Soros and his networks are, of course, behind that, if anyone wants to do a modicum of research. So we have these countries on the Project for the New American Century list being picked off quite demonstrably across different administrations, because that force I talked about earlier in the background is in control of whoever's in power. So that agenda plays out through whoever's in power, or officially so. But then you might say, well, there's a problem with this, because Obama did this nuclear deal with Iran, the big prize of these people. And so everything was honky-dory there. And people said to me at the time, well, where's this Iran thing you were talking about? Because, Obama's done this deal and everything seems fine with Iran. Well, let me go back to another document. It's from 2009, and it was published by a think tank connected to all these networks I'm talking about, and funded by their sources, called the Brookings Institution. And this was a document published in like I say, 2009. And it was called Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Towards Iran. And it said that Iran should be given a, quote, superb offer, only to be intentionally revoked in a manner that portrayed Iran as ungrateful. Anyone notice a connection with current events? This is what the document said. Any military operation against Iran will likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure the logistical support the operation would require and to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium, criticism, censure, and maximize support, however grudging or covert, is to strike only when there is a widespread conviction that the Iranians were given, but then rejected, a superb offer, one so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reasons would turn it down. Under those circumstances, the United States or Israel, it says, could portray its operations as taken in sorrow, not anger, and at least some in the international community would conclude that the Iranians brought it on themselves by refusing a very good deal. Did I mention it was a perception, deception, the whole thing? Exactly what it is, exactly what this is. So, this superb offer then was produced and negotiated by Obama and other countries, including the European Union, with Iran. And everything seemed fine. But when Trump came to power, it was all very different. He said the deal was basically a disaster and bad for America. And when there was a testing by Iran of a ballistic missile recently, which was not in contravention of the deal, they had their excuse. And what did Trump say? Trump said, and so did this Michael Flynn, national security advisor and Iran hater extraordinaire, along with his mate, Mad Dog. They said that Iran had been put on notice, and that Trump said that Iran should have been thankful, here's the wording again, should have been thankful for the nuclear deal. And this is one of his tweets. Yes, the American president communicates with the world on Twitter. This is what Trump said. Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me.